In a city known for its towering skyscrapers, bustling streets, and vibrant neighborhoods, tensions between law enforcement and the community often simmered beneath the surface. Among the police force was Officer Greg Marshall, a man whose reputation as a no-nonsense cop was well known in the precinct. To his colleagues, he was a model officer, dedicated, hard-working, and always ready to take charge. But behind the polished badge and crisp uniform lay deeply ingrained prejudices that would one day bring his career crashing down. Greg had been on the force for over 15 years, and during that time, he had built a name for himself as someone who didn't play games. He prided himself on his ability to spot trouble before it happened, or so he claimed. However, his methods were often questionable, relying more on gut feelings than concrete evidence. Over time, whispers of bias began to circulate among his peers, though few dared to speak up. After all, Greg was skilled at deflecting criticism, always finding ways to justify his actions under the guise of protecting public safety. On a humid summer evening, the kind where the air felt heavy and oppressive, Marcus Johnson, a 34-year-old black man, was making his way home after a long day at work. Marcus was an ordinary guy, a loving husband, a devoted father of two, and a hard-working employee at a local tech company. He wasn't flashy or loud. If anything, he preferred blending into the background, content with living a quiet life. That night, dressed in simple jeans, a plain white t-shirt, and sneakers, Marcus walked briskly along the sidewalk, eager to get home and unwind. As he strolled past rows of parked cars and dimly lit storefronts, Marcus's mind wandered. He thought about dinner plans with his family and the weekend trip they had planned. It was just another unremarkable evening in his routine-filled life. But little did Marcus know, this walk would soon become anything but ordinary. Unbeknownst to him, a patrol car had been cruising slowly behind him for several blocks. Inside sat Officer Greg Marshall, his eyes narrowing as he observed Marcus from behind the wheel. To Greg, something about Marcus seemed suspicious. His casual attire, his steady pace, even the way he glanced around occasionally. None of these things were out of the ordinary, but to Greg they were enough to raise red flags. Without hesitation, Greg pulled the car over to the curb and stepped out, his boots hitting the pavement with a thud. "Hey, you there!" he called out sharply, his voice cutting through the stillness of the evening. Marcus turned, startled by the sudden command. His heart skipped a beat as he saw the officer approaching, hand resting ominously on the grip of his holstered gun. "Is everything okay, officer?" Marcus asked, trying to keep his tone calm despite the knot forming in his stomach. He instinctively slowed his pace, unsure of what was happening. Greg ignored the question and began circling Marcus like a hawk eyeing its prey. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his tone accusatory. "Where do you live? What's your name?" Taken aback by the aggressive line of questioning, Marcus answered truthfully. "I live nearby," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the direction of his apartment building. "My name is Marcus Johnson. I'm just heading home." But Greg wasn't satisfied. He pressed further, asking intrusive questions about Marcus's job, why he was walking instead of driving, and whether he had any identification on him. Each answer only seemed to fuel Greg's suspicion rather than alleviate it. The encounter quickly escalated when Greg suddenly reached for his gun, drawing it from its holster and pointing it directly at Marcus. Time seemed to freeze. Marcus's breath caught in his throat as he stared down the barrel of the weapon, his mind racing with fear and confusion. "Why are you doing this?" he managed to choke out, his hands instinctively rising into the air. "I haven't done anything wrong," Greg sneered, his lips curling into a contemptuous grin. "People like you always say that," he muttered, his words laced with venom. "But we both know how this usually goes." The implication hung heavy in the air, leaving Marcus stunned. Here he was, an innocent man simply trying to get home, and yet he found himself staring death in the face because of the color of his skin. For several agonizing minutes, Greg kept the gun trained on Marcus, refusing to back down, despite Marcus's repeated pleas for reason. Finally, in a moment that felt surreal, Greg barked an order. "Make a phone call. Marcus blinked, momentarily, confused. "What?" he asked, his voice trembling. "You heard me," Greg snapped. "Call someone. Now." Desperate to de-escalate the situation, Marcus fumbled with his phone, his fingers shaking as he dialed his brother-in-law's number. His brother-in-law, James, was a lawyer, and Marcus hoped his intervention might help put an end to this nightmare. As the call connected, Marcus spoke hurriedly, explaining the terrifying ordeal unfolding before him. On the other end of the line, James listened intently, his anger growing with every word. Within minutes, James arrived at the scene, accompanied by two fellow attorneys. Their presence immediately shifted the dynamic, forcing Greg to confront the reality of his actions. One of the lawyers addressed Greg firmly, challenging the legality of his behavior and demanding answers. Faced with mounting pressure, Greg reluctantly lowered his gun but remained defiant, refusing to acknowledge any wrongdoing. By now, a small crowd of bystanders had gathered, some filming the incident on their phones. Videos capturing Greg's hostile demeanor and blatant disregard for protocol quickly spread across social media, igniting outrage far beyond the confines of the neighborhood. Hashtags like #CarJustice for Marcus trended online, drawing attention not only to Marcus's plight, but also to the systemic issues plaguing law enforcement. As the story gained traction, protests erupted outside the police station, with hundreds of people demanding accountability. Signs reading, "End racial profiling" and "Black Lives Matter" filled the streets, echoing the frustrations of a community tired of being treated as suspects based solely on their race. Local news outlets picked up the story, amplifying calls for justice and reform. Back at the precinct, internal investigations were launched to examine Greg's conduct during the incident. Body cam footage confirmed Marcus's account, showing Greg's unwarranted aggression and disregard for proper procedure. Despite his attempts to defend himself, the evidence painted a damning picture. In the weeks that followed, the department made a decisive move. They terminated Greg's employment, citing gross misconduct and violations of ethical standards. Though some hailed the decision as a victory, others argued it was merely the first step toward addressing deeper issues within the system. For Marcus, the ordeal left lasting scars, but it also gave him a platform to advocate for change. He partnered with civil rights organizations, sharing his story to push for better training programs and greater transparency in policing practices. Meanwhile, Greg struggled to rebuild his life. Stripped of his badge and ostracized by former colleagues, he faced lawsuits and mounting financial burdens. In private moments, he wrestled with guilt, though whether genuine remorse or regret over getting caught remained unclear. The incident sparked broader conversations about racial profiling and police accountability, leading to new policies aimed at preventing similar occurrences. While progress was slow, the seeds of change had been planted, nurtured by those unwilling to accept the status quo. And though the road ahead remained fraught with challenges, Marcus's courage illuminated the path forward, proving that standing up against injustice could inspire movements capable of reshaping society itself. The night of the incident, Marcus's life was forever altered. What had started as a routine walk home turned into a harrowing ordeal that left him shaken to his core. As the patrol car pulled up beside him and Officer Greg Marshall stepped out, Marcus felt a wave of unease wash over him. He had encountered police officers before, but something about this interaction felt different, more intense, more hostile. Little did he know, this encounter would expose not only Greg's deep-seated prejudices, but also highlight the systemic issues plaguing law enforcement in his city. Greg's approach was anything but professional. His tone was sharp, his body language aggressive, and his questions invasive. "What are you doing here?" he barked, his voice cutting through the stillness of the evening. Marcus tried to stay calm, answering politely and truthfully. "I live around here," he said, gesturing toward the nearby apartment complex where he resided. But Greg wasn't satisfied. He circled Marcus like a predator, scrutinizing every detail, from his clothing to the way he carried himself, as if searching for some hidden clue that would justify his suspicion. Marcus could feel his heart pounding in his chest. The questions kept coming, each one more accusatory than the last. Where do you work? Why are you walking instead of driving? Do you have ID on you? Marcus answered honestly, explaining that he worked at a tech company downtown and preferred walking because it helped him clear his mind after a long day. Yet no matter how reasonable his responses were, they seemed to fall on deaf ears. Greg's demeanor grew colder, his expression harder, until finally he reached for his gun. Time seemed to slow down as Greg drew his weapon and pointed it directly at Marcus. The sight of the barrel staring back at him sent a chill down Marcus's spine. His hand shot up instinctively, palms open, as he tried to process what was happening. "Why are you doing this?" Marcus asked, his voice trembling. "I haven't done anything wrong." But Greg wasn't listening. Instead, he muttered, under his breath, making comments that revealed the true nature of his intentions. "People like you always say that," he sneered, his words dripping with contempt. "You think I don't know how this works?" Those words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. There was no mistaking the implication. Greg saw him not as an individual but as part of a stereotype, a dangerous assumption based solely on the color of his skin. For several agonizing minutes, Greg kept the gun trained on Marcus, refusing to lower it despite Marcus's repeated pleas for reason. Each second stretched into eternity, filled with fear and uncertainty. Finally, in a moment that felt surreal, Greg issued an unexpected command. "Make a phone call," he ordered, his tone abrupt and commanding. Marcus blinked, momentarily confused. "What?" he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "You heard me," Greg snapped. "Call someone, now," desperate to defuse the situation. Marcus fumbled with his phone, his fingers trembling as he dialed his brother-in-law's number. James, a local attorney, picked up almost immediately. Hearing the panic in Marcus's voice, James sprang into action, assuring him that help was on the way. Over the phone, Marcus recounted the terrifying events, his words rushed and disjointed, as adrenaline coursed through his veins. On the other end, James listened intently, his anger mounting with every detail. Within 20 minutes, James arrived at the scene, accompanied by two fellow attorneys. Their presence immediately shifted the dynamic. Dressed in suits and carrying briefcases, they exuded authority and demanded accountability. One of them approached Greg, addressing him firmly. "Officer, can you explain why you're pointing a gun at this man?" he asked, his tone leaving no room for evasion. Greg hesitated, clearly caught off guard by the sudden arrival of legal representation. He lowered his gun reluctantly but remained defiant, attempting to justify his actions. "I had reasonable suspicion," he claimed, though his argument sounded hollow even to his own ears. The lawyers pushed back, questioning the legality of his behavior and pointing out the lack of evidence to support his claims. Faced with mounting pressure, Greg grew increasingly agitated, his earlier bravado crumbling under scrutiny. By now, a small crowd of bystanders had gathered, drawn by the commotion. Some recorded the scene on their phones, capturing Greg's aggressive demeanor and blatant disregard for protocol. Videos of the incident quickly spread across social media, igniting outrage far beyond the neighborhood. Hashtags like "Justice for Marcus" began trending online, drawing attention not only to Marcus's plight but also to the broader issue of racial profiling within law enforcement. As news of the incident gained traction, protests erupted outside the police station. Hundreds of people took to the streets holding signs that read, "End police brutality" and "Black Lives Matter." Chants echoed through the city, calling for accountability and reform. Local news outlets picked up the story, amplifying the voices of those demanding change. Community leaders organized rallies, urging residents to come together and demand justice not just for Marcus, but for countless others who had suffered similar injustices. Back at the precinct, internal investigations were launched to examine Greg's conduct during the incident. Body cam footage confirmed Marcus's account, showing Greg's unwarranted aggression and disregard for proper procedure. Despite his attempts to defend himself, the evidence painted a damning picture. In the weeks that followed, the department made a decisive move. They terminated Greg's employment, citing gross misconduct and violations of ethical standards. While some hailed the decision as a victory, others argued it was merely the first step toward addressing deeper issues within the system. For Marcus, the ordeal left lasting scars, but it also gave him a platform to advocate for change. He partnered with civil rights organizations, sharing his story to push for better training programs and greater transparency in policing practices. His courage inspired others to speak out against injustice, proving that even in the face of adversity, hope could emerge when people stood together. Meanwhile, Greg struggled to rebuild his life. Stripped of his badge and ostracized by former colleagues, he faced lawsuits filed by Marcus and backlash from the community. Financial burdens piled up, and isolation consumed him. In private moments, he wrestled with guilt, though whether genuine remorse or regret over getting caught remained unclear. The incident sparked broader conversations about racial profiling and police accountability, leading to new policies aimed at preventing similar occurrences. While progress was slow, the seeds of change had been planted, nurtured by those unwilling to accept the status quo. And though the road ahead remained fraught with challenges, Marcus's bravery illuminated the path forward, proving that standing up against hatred could inspire movements capable of reshaping society itself. The aftermath of the incident rippled through the community like a shockwave, leaving no one untouched. For Marcus Johnson, the man at the center of the storm, life became a whirlwind of media attention, public support, and personal reflection. The video footage captured by bystanders had gone viral overnight, sparking outrage across social media platforms. Protesters took to the streets, their chants echoing through the city as they demanded justice, not just for Marcus but for countless others who had faced similar injustices. Marcus found himself thrust into an unfamiliar role, that of a reluctant activist. He wasn't someone who sought the spotlight. He was a family man, content with his quiet life. But now, people looked to him as a symbol of resilience and courage. Every interview request, every rally invitation, felt like both an opportunity and a burden. While he wanted to use his experience to drive change, the constant reminders of that terrifying night weighed heavily on him. At first, Marcus struggled to articulate his feelings. How could he put into words the fear he felt when Officer Greg Marshall pointed a gun at him? How could he convey the frustration of being judged not by his actions but by the color of his skin? With time, however, Marcus began finding his voice. In interviews, he spoke candidly about the humiliation and anger he experienced during the encounter. "It's not just about what happened to me," he said in one televised appearance. "It's about how many others have been treated the same way or worse and never got the chance to tell their story." His words resonated deeply with the public. People from all walks of life reached out to share their own stories of discrimination and mistreatment at the hands of law enforcement. Some recounted being pulled over without cause, while others described being followed in stores or harassed in public spaces. These shared experiences created a sense of solidarity among marginalized communities, uniting them under a common goal: to demand accountability and systemic reform. Meanwhile, the police department faced mounting pressure to address the misconduct exposed by the incident. Internal investigations revealed glaring flaws in Greg's behavior: his lack of probable cause, his failure to follow protocol, and his blatant disregard for ethical standards. Yet it wasn't just Greg's actions that came under scrutiny. The investigation also uncovered patterns of bias within the department, raising questions about whether such incidents were isolated or part of a larger problem. In response to public outcry, the department announced several measures aimed at rebuilding trust with the community. Mandatory anti-bias training programs were introduced, requiring officers to undergo rigorous education on racial sensitivity and cultural awareness. Body cameras, which had previously been optional, were made mandatory for all officers on duty. Additionally, a civilian oversight board was established to review complaints against law enforcement and ensure transparency in disciplinary actions. While these steps were welcomed by some, others remained skeptical. Critics argued that true reform required more than superficial changes. It needed a fundamental shift in mindset. "Training sessions and new policies are important," said James, Marcus's brother-in-law and attorney, during a press conference. But unless we address the root causes of prejudice and hold individuals accountable for their actions, nothing will really change. As the debate raged on, Greg Marshall found himself grappling with the consequences of his choices. Stripped of his badge and reputation, he became a pariah in the community. Former colleagues distanced themselves from him, unwilling to associate with someone whose actions had brought shame to the force. Legal battles loomed large as Marcus filed a lawsuit seeking damages for emotional distress and violation of civil rights. Financial strain added to Greg's woes, forcing him to sell his home and take odd jobs to make ends meet. But perhaps the hardest blow was the isolation. Once a respected figure in his neighborhood, Greg now avoided public places, fearing judgmental stares and hostile reactions. In private moments, he wrestled with guilt, though whether it stemmed from genuine remorse or regret over getting caught remained unclear. Friends urged him to seek counseling, hoping therapy might help him confront his biases and understand the harm he had caused. But Greg resisted, clinging stubbornly to his belief that he had simply been doing his job. For Marcus, the legal proceedings against Greg provided a small measure of closure. The court ruled in his favor, awarding him substantial compensation and ordering Greg to attend mandatory diversity training. Yet Marcus knew that money and apologies couldn't erase the trauma he endured. What mattered most to him was using his platform to effect lasting change. He partnered with local organizations to advocate for policy reforms, speaking at schools, town halls, and community events. His message was simple, yet powerful. Everyone deserved to feel safe in their own skin, regardless of race or background. The movement inspired by Marcus's story spread beyond the city, gaining national attention. Activists across the country rallied behind the hashtag Justice for Marcus, organizing marches and vigils to honor victims of racial profiling. Politicians began discussing legislation aimed at holding law enforcement accountable for discriminatory practices. Slowly but surely, the tide was turning. Back in the city, tangible progress started taking shape. Community policing initiatives brought officers closer to residents, fostering relationships built on mutual respect rather than suspicion. Dialogue forums allowed citizens to voice their concerns directly to law enforcement leaders, creating opportunities for open communication. Even officers who initially resisted change began recognizing the value of empathy and understanding in their work. Of course, challenges persisted. Old habits died hard, and not everyone embraced the push for reform. Skeptics questioned whether the changes would stick or fade once the headlines moved on. Yet there was no denying that something significant had shifted. People were talking about issues that had long been ignored, and conversations often led to action. For Marcus, the journey was far from over. Though scars remained, he chose to focus on the future. A future where his children wouldn't have to fear walking home alone because of the color of their skin. Each day, he reminded himself why he kept fighting, not just for himself, but for generations to come. And so the story continued, not as a tale of despair, but as one of hope. Hope that even in the darkest moments, courage could spark movements capable of reshaping society. Hope that standing up against injustice could inspire others to do the same. And hope that someday equality might truly become a reality for all. As the weeks turned into months, the impact of Marcus Johnson's ordeal continued to ripple through the city, shaping conversations and challenging long-held beliefs. The incident had become more than just a moment of injustice. It was now a catalyst for change, igniting debates about racial profiling, police accountability, and systemic reform. Yet, for Marcus, the road ahead was neither smooth nor predictable. Each day brought new challenges, unexpected victories, and moments of reflection that tested his resolve. The media attention surrounding Marcus's case showed no signs of slowing down. News outlets from across the country reached out to interview him, eager to hear his perspective on the growing movement against racial bias in law enforcement. At first, Marcus hesitated to step into the role of a public figure. He wasn't comfortable being the face of a national conversation, especially when he considered himself just an ordinary man, caught in extraordinary circumstances. But as letters poured in from people sharing their own stories of discrimination, Marcus realized his voice carried weight and responsibility. "I didn't ask for this," Marcus said during one televised interview, his hands clasped tightly together as he spoke. "But if telling my story can help someone else feel less alone, then I'll do it. If it means pushing for changes that protect others from going through what I did, then I have to keep speaking up." His words struck a chord with viewers. People admired his courage and humility, qualities that made him relatable despite the harrowing nature of his experience. Activists praised him for using his platform wisely, while critics accused him of seeking fame. But Marcus paid little attention to either side. He remained focused on the bigger picture, ensuring that no one else had to endure the fear and humiliation he faced on that fateful night. Meanwhile, Officer Greg Marshall's life spiraled further into chaos. Stripped of his badge, he struggled to find employment in any field, let alone law enforcement. His attempts to explain his actions fell flat, dismissed as excuses by those who saw him as a symbol of everything wrong with policing. Isolation consumed him, leaving him bitter and resentful. Friends and family tried to reach out, urging him to confront his prejudices and seek redemption. But Greg resisted. Instead, he retreated further into denial, convinced that he was the victim of a witch hunt rather than the perpetrator of an egregious act. Greg's legal troubles compounded his misery. The lawsuit filed by Marcus resulted in a court ruling that not only awarded Marcus substantial damages, but also mandated Greg attend mandatory diversity training sessions. These sessions were designed to educate participants on implicit biases and foster empathy for marginalized communities. For Greg, however, they felt like punishment rather than opportunity. Sitting in a room full of strangers forced to confront uncomfortable truths, he often tuned out, refusing to engage in discussions or acknowledge the harm he had caused. Outside the courtroom, the protests demanding justice for Marcus grew louder and more widespread. What began as a local outcry evolved into a national movement, drawing support from activists, politicians, and celebrities alike. Hashtags like #Justice for Marcus trended repeatedly on social media, amplifying calls for accountability and reform. Protesters marched through city streets, holding signs that read, "Enough is enough," and "Reform now." Their voices echoed not only Marcus's pain, but also the collective frustration of communities tired of being treated as suspects based solely on their race. In response to mounting pressure, the police department implemented sweeping changes aimed at rebuilding trust with the community. Officers were required to undergo rigorous anti-bias training, which included workshops led by experts in racial equity and cultural sensitivity. Body cameras became standard equipment, with strict guidelines ensuring footage was reviewed and stored properly. A civilian oversight board was established to handle complaints against law enforcement, providing an independent mechanism for accountability. Yet not everyone embraced these reforms enthusiastically. Some officers grumbled about the additional workload, viewing the measures as unnecessary bureaucracy. Others expressed genuine concern, wondering whether the changes would truly address the root causes of bias or merely serve as a temporary fix. Community leaders acknowledged the skepticism, emphasizing the importance of consistent follow-through. "Policies are only as good as the people enforcing them," said James, Marcus's brother-in-law, during a panel discussion. "We need officers who genuinely believe in equality and fairness, not just those following orders." Despite resistance, progress began to take shape. Community policing initiatives brought officers closer to residents, fostering relationships built on mutual respect rather than suspicion. Dialogue forums allowed citizens to voice their concerns directly to law enforcement leaders, creating opportunities for open communication. Slowly but surely, trust started to rebuild brick by brick. For Marcus, the most rewarding aspect of the journey was seeing tangible results. Schools invited him to speak to students about resilience and advocacy, inspiring young minds to stand up against injustice. Local organizations partnered with him to create programs aimed at educating youth about civil rights and civic engagement. Even businesses pledged to support diversity initiatives, recognizing the economic and social benefits of inclusivity. But the path forward wasn't without setbacks. There were days when Marcus questioned whether his efforts were making a difference. When another high-profile case of police brutality emerged elsewhere in the country, Marcus couldn't help but feel disheartened. "It's exhausting," he admitted to James one evening over dinner. "Just when you think things are getting better, something happens to remind you how far we still have to go." James nodded sympathetically. "Change doesn't happen overnight," he said. "But every step counts, even the small ones." Encouraged by his brother-in-law's words, Marcus pressed on, determined to stay hopeful. He reminded himself of the countless individuals who had reached out to thank him for giving them a voice. He thought about the children in his neighborhood, watching him advocate for justice and dreaming of a world where equality wasn't just an ideal, but a reality. And he held on to the belief that even the smallest actions could spark monumental shifts. Back in the precinct, some officers began embracing the reforms with surprising enthusiasm. Detective Lisa Carter, a veteran cop known for her dedication to community service, took it upon herself to mentor younger colleagues on the importance of empathy and accountability. "Being a police officer isn't just about enforcing laws," she told them during a training session. "It's about protecting people, all people, regardless of who they are or where they come from." Her efforts inspired others to rethink their approach to policing. Gradually, the culture within the department shifted, with more officers prioritizing dialogue over confrontation and understanding over suspicion. Residents noticed the difference, reporting increased satisfaction with their interactions with law enforcement. As the year drew to a close, Marcus reflected on how much had changed since that terrifying night. While scars remained, both personal and societal, he found solace in knowing that his courage had sparked meaningful conversations and tangible progress. He looked forward to a future where his children could walk freely, unburdened by the weight of prejudice. And he vowed to continue fighting, not just for himself but for everyone who deserved to live without fear. The journey was far from over, but Marcus knew one thing for certain. Standing up against injustice wasn't just about winning battles. It was about planting seeds of hope that could grow into something greater, something transformative, something lasting. As the months passed, Marcus Johnson's story continued to resonate far beyond the boundaries of his city. What had begun as a single act of injustice transformed into a nationwide conversation about systemic racism, police accountability, and the urgent need for reform. For Marcus, this newfound role as an advocate came with its own set of challenges. Balancing personal healing with public activism was no easy feat. Yet he remained steadfast in his mission, driven by the belief that change was possible if enough people stood together. The legal battle against Officer Greg Marshall reached its conclusion, marking a significant milestone in Marcus's journey. The court ruling not only awarded him substantial financial compensation, but also mandated sweeping reforms within the police department. These included stricter protocols for when officers could draw their weapons, mandatory diversity training programs, and increased oversight from civilian review boards. While these measures were celebrated as victories, Marcus knew they were just the beginning. "This isn't about punishing one person," he said during a press conference following the verdict. "It's about creating a system where everyone feels safe and respected." Despite the progress, Greg's fall from grace served as a sobering reminder of the consequences of unchecked prejudice. Stripped of his badge, ostracized by colleagues, and burdened by lawsuits, Greg struggled to adapt to life outside law enforcement. His attempts to find work were met with rejection after rejection, leaving him financially strained and emotionally drained. Friends urged him to seek counseling or join support groups for former officers grappling with similar issues. But Greg refused. Instead, he clung to his belief that he had been unfairly targeted, blaming the media and activist groups for tarnishing his reputation. In private moments, however, cracks began to show in Greg's hardened exterior. Late at night, alone in his small apartment, he replayed the events of that fateful evening over and over in his mind. He couldn't shake the image of Marcus standing there, hands raised, fear etched across his face. The memory haunted him, though he still couldn't bring himself to admit fault. Instead, he convinced himself it was all part of the job, a necessary evil required to maintain order. But deep down, doubt lingered. Was he truly protecting the public, or had he become the very thing he swore to fight against? While Greg wrestled with his inner turmoil, Marcus focused on channeling his energy into meaningful action. He partnered with civil rights organizations to launch initiatives aimed at educating communities about their rights and empowering them to hold law enforcement accountable. Workshops were held in schools, churches, and community centers, teaching attendees how to document incidents of misconduct and file formal complaints. Marcus also worked closely with local lawmakers to draft legislation addressing racial profiling and excessive use of force. Though the process was slow and often frustrating, each small victory fueled his determination to keep pushing forward. One of the most impactful projects Marcus undertook was a mentorship program for young Black men and women. Inspired by the countless letters he received from teenagers who saw themselves in his story, Marcus wanted to provide guidance and encouragement to the next generation. Every Saturday morning, he met with a group of high school students, sharing his experiences and listening to theirs. Together, they discussed ways to navigate systemic barriers while staying true to their values. "You don't have to let fear define you," Marcus told them during one session. "Even when things feel impossible, remember that your voice matters. Never stop using it." The ripple effects of Marcus's advocacy extended far beyond his immediate circle. Across the country, activists rallied behind the Justice for Marcus movement, organizing marches, vigils, and educational campaigns to raise awareness about racial inequality. Politicians began incorporating calls for police reform into their platforms, recognizing the growing demand for accountability. Even corporations joined the effort, pledging donations to organizations fighting for social justice and implementing diversity initiatives within their workplaces. Back in the city, tangible changes started taking root. Community policing programs flourished, fostering stronger relationships between officers and residents. Officers participated in neighborhood cleanup events, youth sports leagues, and cultural festivals, breaking down barriers and building trust. Dialogue forums became regular fixtures, allowing citizens to voice concerns directly to law enforcement leaders. These open conversations revealed areas for improvement, leading to adjustments in policies and practices. Detective Lisa Carter emerged as a key figure in driving these efforts forward. Her commitment to empathy and transparency inspired many of her colleagues to adopt a similar mindset. During roll call meetings, she encouraged officers to reflect on their interactions with the public, emphasizing the importance of treating every individual with dignity and respect. "We're here to serve, not to dominate," she reminded them. "Every decision we make should reflect that." Still, not everyone embraced the reforms enthusiastically. Some officers grumbled about the additional responsibilities, viewing them as unnecessary distractions from their primary duties. Others expressed skepticism, questioning whether the changes would truly address underlying biases or merely serve as performative gestures. Community leaders acknowledged these concerns, urging patience and persistence. Change takes time. James often reminded audiences during panel discussions. But silence and complacency will only perpetuate the problem. We have to keep pushing. For Marcus, the journey was both exhausting and exhilarating. There were days when the weight of responsibility felt overwhelming, leaving him questioning whether his efforts were making a difference. When news broke of another incident involving police brutality elsewhere in the country, Marcus couldn't help but feel disheartened. "It's like we take 2 steps forward and 3 steps back," he confided to James one evening. "How do we keep going when it feels like nothing ever really changes?" James placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Because giving up isn't an option," he replied. "Every time you speak out, every time you push for reform, you're planting seeds. It might not happen overnight, but those seeds will grow. They have to." Encouraged by his brother-in-law's words, Marcus pressed on, drawing strength from the countless individuals who continued to reach out to thank him for inspiring them to take action. He thought about the children in his neighborhood, watching him stand up for what was right and dreaming of a world where equality wasn't just an ideal, but a reality. And he held on to the belief that even the smallest actions could spark monumental shifts. By the end of the year, Marcus found himself reflecting on how much had changed since that terrifying night. While scars remained, both personal and societal, he took solace in knowing that his courage had ignited a movement capable of reshaping society. He looked forward to a future where his children could walk freely, unburdened by the weight of prejudice. And he vowed to continue fighting, not just for himself but for everyone who deserved to live without fear. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but Marcus remained hopeful. He believed in the power of collective voices demanding accountability and justice. He believed in the resilience of communities coming together to challenge systems of oppression. Most importantly, he believed in the possibility of transformation, not just within institutions but within hearts and minds. Because in the end, real change didn't come from laws or policies alone. It came from people choosing to see each other as equals and working together to build a better world. As the year drew to a close, Marcus Johnson found himself reflecting on the whirlwind of events that had reshaped his life and the lives of countless others. What had begun as an ordinary evening walk home had spiraled into a national reckoning about racial injustice and police accountability. Though the scars of that terrifying night remained etched in his memory, Marcus chose to focus on the progress he'd witnessed over the past months. The movement sparked by his courage had ignited conversations, inspired action, and planted seeds of hope for a more equitable future. For Marcus, the culmination of his advocacy work came during a landmark event, the unveiling of a new policy framework designed to address systemic racism within law enforcement. Dubbed the Community Trust Initiative, the program was crafted through collaboration between activists, lawmakers, and law enforcement leaders, including Detective Lisa Carter, who had become a vocal advocate for reform. The initiative included measures such as independent oversight boards with real power to investigate misconduct, mandatory cultural sensitivity, training for all officers, and incentives for departments adopting de-escalation strategies. It also established a hotline for citizens to report incidents of bias or abuse anonymously. At the ceremony marking the launch of the initiative, Marcus stood at the podium, addressing a crowd of hundreds gathered in the city square. Behind him hung a banner bearing the words, "Justice through Unity." His voice trembled slightly as he began to speak, but it grew steadier with each sentence. "This is not just my victory," he said, scanning the sea of faces before him. "It belongs to every person who has ever felt unseen, unheard, or unsafe because of the color of their skin. Today we take one step closer to a world where no one has to live in fear of those sworn to protect them." The audience erupted in applause, many rising to their feet. Among them were community leaders, activists, and even some officers who had embraced the call for change. For Marcus, this moment represented more than just recognition. It symbolized the collective effort required to dismantle oppressive systems and build something better in their place. Meanwhile, Officer Greg Marshall's descent into obscurity continued. Once a respected figure in his precinct, he now lived a shadowy existence, shunned by former colleagues and ostracized by the community. Financial struggles compounded his misery. Unable to find stable employment, he took odd jobs to make ends meet. Despite the hardships, Greg clung stubbornly to his belief that he had been unfairly singled out. He avoided public spaces, fearing judgmental stares and hostile reactions, and spent most of his time alone in his cramped apartment. Yet there were moments when cracks appeared in his armor of denial. Late at night, sitting in silence, Greg replayed the incident with Marcus over and over in his mind. He couldn't escape the image of Marcus standing there, hands raised, eyes wide with fear. The memory gnawed at him, though he still refused to admit wrongdoing. Instead, he convinced himself that he had simply been doing his job, a mantra he repeated like a shield against guilt. But deep down, he knew the truth. His actions had caused harm, and nothing could undo that. One evening, while scrolling through social media, Greg stumbled upon a video of Marcus speaking at a rally. In it, Marcus recounted the details of their encounter, his voice steady, yet filled with emotion. "I didn't deserve to be treated like a criminal," Marcus said, pausing, to let the weight of his words sink in. "But I'm choosing to use my pain to fight for a better future. For myself, for my children, and for everyone who deserves to feel safe." Greg clicked off the video abruptly, his chest tight with conflicting emotions. Anger bubbled to the surface, anger at Marcus, at the system, at himself, but beneath it lay something else. Shame. For the first time, Greg allowed himself to consider the possibility that he might have been wrong. That maybe, just maybe, his biases had clouded his judgment and led him down a path he could never undo. It was a painful realization, one he wasn't ready to fully confront. But it lingered, planting a seed of doubt that would eventually demand answers. Back in the community, the reforms brought tangible changes that residents could see and feel. Officers patrolled neighborhoods not as enforcers but as partners, engaging in conversations rather than confrontations. Community policing initiatives flourished, with officers participating in local events and building relationships with residents. Dialogue forums became regular fixtures, fostering open communication between law enforcement and the people they served. Slowly but surely, trust began to rebuild, a fragile yet hopeful foundation upon which to build a brighter future. Marcus played a pivotal role in nurturing this transformation. Through his mentorship program, he continued to inspire young people to believe in their potential and advocate for justice. Every Saturday morning, he met with his group of high school students, sharing stories of resilience and encouraging them to dream big despite the obstacles they faced. "You are stronger than any system designed to hold you back," he told them during one session. "Never let anyone tell you otherwise." His efforts extended beyond mentoring. Marcus partnered with schools to develop curricula focused on civil rights history and civic engagement, ensuring that future generations understood the importance of standing up against injustice. He also worked with businesses to promote diversity and inclusion, helping create workplaces where everyone felt valued and respected. Each project reinforced his belief that lasting change required collaboration across all sectors of society. As the movement gained momentum, its impact reached far beyond the city. Activists across the country rallied behind the Nasher Justice for Marcus campaign, organizing marches, vigils, and educational workshops to raise awareness about racial inequality. Politicians incorporated calls for reform into their platforms, recognizing the growing demand for accountability. Even corporations pledged support, donating funds to organizations fighting for social justice and implementing diversity initiatives within their ranks. Despite the progress, challenges persisted. Not everyone embraced the push for reform, and resistance lingered in certain corners of society. Some officers grumbled about the additional responsibilities, viewing them as burdensome distractions. Others expressed skepticism, questioning whether the changes would truly address underlying biases or merely serve as performative gestures. Critics argued that true reform required deeper structural shifts, including reallocating resources to prioritize community-based solutions over punitive measures. Marcus acknowledged these concerns, urging patience and persistence. Change doesn't happen overnight, he often reminded audiences during panel discussions. But silence and complacency will only perpetuate the problem. We have to keep pushing. By the end of the year, Marcus found himself reflecting on how much had changed since that fateful night. While scars remained, both personal and societal, he took solace in knowing that his courage had ignited a movement capable of reshaping society. He looked forward to a future where his children could walk freely, unburdened by the weight of prejudice, and he vowed to continue fighting, not just for himself but for everyone who deserved to live without fear. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but Marcus remained hopeful. He believed in the power of collective voices demanding accountability and justice. He believed in the resilience of communities coming together to challenge systems of oppression. Most importantly, he believed in the possibility of transformation, not just within institutions but within hearts and minds. Because in the end, Real change didn't come from laws or policies alone. It came from people choosing to see each other as equals and working together to build a better world. And so, Marcus's story became more than just a tale of survival. It became a testament to the enduring power of hope, courage, and unity. A reminder that even in the darkest moments, light could emerge when people stood together against injustice. A beacon of inspiration for generations to come, proving that standing up for what is right could spark movements capable of reshaping society itself.